Hello again, and welcome to Survive and Thrive, your media viability podcast. While most of us in the media are familiar with the obvious challenges involved in running a journalistic operation, from financial to editorial, not all challenges are created equal. Today, we're talking about what it means to survive in a landscape that's hostile to journalism and to democracy in general, and whether it is in fact possible under those conditions to thrive. I'm Janelle de Malaon. Our next guest knows what it's like to run a news organization in the face of systematic oppression as a journalist, as a citizen, and as a woman. I'd like to welcome Zahra Nader, founder of the Zan Times. That's a woman-led investigative newsroom covering human rights violations in Afghanistan with a focus on women and the LGBTQI plus community. Welcome, Zahra.
Hi, Jeanette. Thank you for having me.
Now, in a moment, Zahra will go deep into what it means to run an organization like the Zan Times. But first, we have a short round of introductory questions for you. We're looking for very quick answers, phrases if at all possible, so let's keep it rolling. Your business model in
Resistance.
Did you ever manage a moment when everything seemed lost? What would you need to thrive in the future?
Funding.
Funding. Yeah. All right. You really got this game, I have to tell you.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I'm very interested to hear more in the course of this conversation. But I think first, a little bit of a situation, or you do run an organization, an Afghan newsroom, but I suppose we have to make it clear first that you're not in Afghanistan. So can you tell us a little bit about your circumstance?
So I am, as you said, I'm not in Afghanistan. I left Afghanistan for good in 2017. And by the time the Taliban take over Afghanistan, I was doing my PhD in Women and Gender Studies in Toronto, Canada. And perhaps because I was a journalist in Afghanistan, and when I moved to Canada, it didn't seem easy for me to go back to journalism. So I went back to school and just I was thinking that my future is in academia, and I wanted to and imagining a future for myself in Afghanistan, teaching at Kabul University. They had a gender and women studies, department. It was a very new department, and I was thinking maybe that's a good place for me to be and train the next generation of women in Afghanistan. But unfortunately, with the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, that literally changed. And from day one, I started just working as a journalist and reporting on what was happening in Afghanistan and particularly to women.
You did start the Zan Times when the Taliban retook power in August 2021. Would you say that was the best time to start a newsroom or the worst time?
I think in many ways it was the worst time, and also I didn't really looked at creating Zan Times as a normally you would think of creating, startup organization. You have so much planning around it. You're thinking about it, conceptualizing and conducting research. None of that were happening for Zan Times. We were just feeling responsible for what was happening, feeling heartbroken, and thinking what is our responsibility during a time when the Taliban have taken over and literally stripped women of all their basic human rights. What's our role? And because we were journalists, the answer was the only thing right now we can do is to report, to cover those stories and keep the world informed. And that's what we started doing. So to give you an idea, I had no idea about how do you manage a team, how do you run a team, how do you build an organization. And I didn't have the luxury of time to go sit and research it and learn and be prepared for the challenge ahead. I just jumped in. It was a passion for journalism, and it was a responsibility that we were feeling. And then with that came a lots of challenges and problems that we faced over the past 2 years.
So definitely not the easiest time, but the time where you felt most called upon to do something.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's very brave of you. I think anyone who has kept up with Afghanistan, even only on a surface levels, know that the return of the Taliban has represented a setback in every way for women's rights. What's it like as a women-led newsroom reporting on women's issues there?
So let me start with the recent clampdown. So the Taliban have issued or approved a new law in Afghanistan, which basically made it impossible or banned women's faces, women's voices in public. And literally, what that really means to translate it for in terms of journalism is that women won't be allowed to work at least for any visual and also audio media in Afghanistan, and that is just one aspect of it. But if we go back to when the Taliban take over, they immediately and but slowly started removing women from society, and that happened with women being banned from most public servant jobs, and then women being banned from schools, girls being banned from schools beyond grade 6, and then universities were banned, women were banned from working with the NGOs, women were banned from traveling alone. There, like this law for women must cover their faces in public came out on May 2022. So we had all these levels of restriction that was coming up. And what it happened is literally it made it impossible for most women journalists to continue their work. By December 2021, which was 4 months into the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, Reporters Without Borders said from every 5 women journalists who are working in Afghanistan, only one journalist left working, meaning that four others have lost their job. So, in a country like Afghanistan, where it was already one of the worst places in the earth for women, it made it almost impossible because when you don't have access to women's voices, it's very difficult for anybody to understand what was happening. And in this context, no news is not good news. And that is heartbreaking. So what we are trying to do is to helping women journalists in Afghanistan to be able to continue their work, to report on the situation of the most vulnerable in Afghanistan, and do it. It's very hard for me to say safely because there is no safety in Afghanistan left, especially for journalists and especially for women journalists. But we are trying to find ways how they can do this work and still not be caught by the Taliban. And that has been an ongoing struggle day in and day out for us.
You've described that there is a certain danger of degree of danger rather involved for you and your colleagues. What I don't want to go into some nightmare building scenario, but can you tell us a little bit about the costs? What can happen when you undertake this work?
So we have many times we know that the Taliban are looking not only for Zan Times journalists but also for any journalists who are reporting critical issues about human rights and about atrocities that the Taliban are committing in Afghanistan today. So that was the truth when we started our work. We had no illusion about safety or how the Taliban would treat journalists. So we started with this idea that we have to keep, we have to ensure that our team in Afghanistan should not know each other, because if they know each other, that's a threat to our work and also a threat to the safety of our journalists in Afghanistan. Because God forbid, and if one of our colleagues is arrested, there is no assurance under the Taliban would torture, and that has already been very well documented that how the Taliban treat prisoners. And so basically, we knew that anything could happen. So let's take some precautions to think how we can prevent some of the obvious from happening, and that start with us trying to connect each journalist in Afghanistan with an editor outside the country, and also ensuring that the team work on their pen names, that hopefully there's no connection between them and they don't interview the Taliban officials or affiliates in Afghanistan. So some of those work, if we need to do, that's being done by our colleagues outside the country. But the scenario, to tell you about the scenario, is that the Taliban have arrested so many journalists in Afghanistan. They have arrested women for speaking out, and to give you one example of those is the story of a female YouTuber, which we covered recently. She was killed last August, and it was said that basically the news of her death was published last year without not a lot of context. So the people started talking and saying that she was killed by the Taliban. She was a very famous and conventional Afghan woman who would go to the streets, who would still portray a social life for women in Afghanistan. something that we would not usually imagine happening under the Taliban, but she was doing it. She was singing, she was socializing with her friends. Um, and then what happened is that the news of her death was shocking, and everybody started talking that she was killed by the Taliban. Soon after, the Taliban published a 20-minute video documentary, um, trying to convince the public that she was either killed by suicide, or by ingesting rat poison by her friends, like suspiciously. But in the statement that they were providing, it was like so contradictory. At the same time, they have brought her family, her mother and brother, to talk in this video. And again, like, the story was not matching with what we already knew. So this started our investigation, and we investigated this story, and we found out that she was killed by the Taliban, and her body was left in a public hospital in Afghanistan, and her family were ordered to pick up the body. And we published that story. So that is the cost of being an outspoken Afghan woman and trying to keep um, to be visible in society and do something that, or to have a public role in Afghanistan.
Where do you and your colleagues find the courage to continue in the face of the risk of arrest and the risk of death?
I think it's about purpose, and also for most of my colleagues in Afghanistan, their purpose, who they were, is taken away from them. And when I talk with them, they give me so much hope, so much power, that I really feel proud to have this opportunity to work with them. To just give you one example, we had a workshop on trauma informed journalism, where we had some space to talk about, our fears, like every day going on, like how do we feel about our work, about the threats and risk that our colleagues face. And I remember one of my colleagues said, every day that I go out, I go with this sense of fear that today is the day that the Taliban is going to arrest me. But I go out anyway, and feeling that I am doing something that's important, being the voice of the woman in my community, and that gives meaning to my life. And that allows me to move forward even as the Taliban are shrinking our space. They are removing more, like they're trying to make us invisible and remove us from society. We are still here, and we are still raising our voices, and that is what I'm trying to live up to. And every morning waking up and thinking that I have a mission, a purpose in my life.
It's a very big mission indeed. I just want to ask you, are the Taliban aware of the Zan Times, and do they make that awareness known to you?
Yes, I think definitely they are aware of our presence and the work that we do. And how I have, and some of my colleagues have already spoken, sometimes with the Taliban, getting, like for example, the story I told you, we talk with the Taliban and we get their comments on what our investigation shows and what they're talking about it. So they definitely know, and they might not have said this in our face that we are looking for you, but we know that the Taliban is actively looking for our colleagues. They are actively looking to prevent our work, to stop what we are doing, because we are bringing critical information to the public, which kind of, like shows who the Taliban are and documents their crimes. So they definitely are trying to prevent us, are trying to stop us from doing this work.
You've pointed out how important it is, even in the face of danger, to uplift women's voices when they are being repressed. You also focus on the LGBTQI plus community, another repressed community in Afghanistan. How easy is it to find those stories? How easy is it to report on the community?
So I think I just want to make this clear that even before the Taliban, like the situation of LGBTQ in Afghanistan were not good. We were not talking as a public. There was not much awareness about their situation, about their rights, and there was literally no protection for them. But still, they were able to exist and continue to live their life at the margin of society, doing whatever precarious job they could do. But with the Taliban takeover, this community in particularly face, death, because for the Taliban, their existence is illegal. Their existence is something against Sharia. They should not be existing. This idea that when we are specifically focusing on LGBTQ community, the part of this is, as a woman, of course, like all women in Afghanistan are oppressed. That's how the Taliban have waged a war on women. But women in Afghanistan can still stand up and say, I'm a woman. It's like not a crime to admit like you're a woman, to admit your gender. But for the LGBTQ community, that's not possible. So the level of suppression is so high that they constantly should be hiding not only from the Taliban, but also from their own families, from their own communities, and there is no support for them. So their existence is at risk. And the Taliban systematically is arresting them, is picking them up, and we are hearing a lot of instances that they're being sexually harassed and attacked and raped in the Taliban prison very brutally. So the way we access their stories is through a network of activists and people who are working with the LGBTQ community. We reach out to them, and with their help, we are trying to cover part of their stories. And again, I admit that I feel we still fail to be able to do a good job in covering this most oppressed, group of people in Afghanistan, and that's because we don't have a lot of resources, and we don't have journalists who are specialized in covering LGBTQ community, or we don't have any journalists from the community to be able to tell their stories. So these are some of the challenges that we are hoping to be able to address in the future.
I think that you're covering the medal is obviously a giant step towards trying to promote their rights and obviously, their potential to exist, to flourish in society, even though that does seem a long way off. Now, we talked a little bit about this already in terms of guaranteeing the safety of your colleagues. There's no guarantee, but there are steps that you can take to reduce the chance of harm to them. What about for the people that you talk to, like the LGBTQI plus community that we just spoke about?
That's a very good question. And the reason is sometimes I talk about safety and I say, for some of the newsroom, the concern might be like how to keep our sources safe. But ours is a layers of thinking about how to keep our colleagues safe, how to keep our sources safe, and also how to establish trust in a way that we would be able to tell these stories. So this is very, very challenging. So the way we try to approach our sources is from a point of informed consent, that most of the time we tell them the risk associated with them talking to us, and that we promise anonymity. So we tell them that we'll not be using your real name, and also we will try to remove any information that we think might lead to their identification. So we have used this measure since we started our work, and thankfully, we have not faced a loss of or any circumstances where anybody have been identified through our reporting. But that is a concern, and then that's also an ongoing conversation that we have every day as a editorial team of thinking. And there are times that we decided not to run a story because we felt that if this story is published, the source might be identifiable. So that's a decision and conversation that we have daily.
I understand. It must be a process. Every case so individualized, so specific.
Exactly.
There are the stories that you tell, and you are, of course, the people delivering these stories, but they are also received by an audience. So can you tell me a little bit about your readers? Who are the Zan Times readers? Is the Zan Times easily accessible to them? Can you tell us a little bit about for whom your work is targeted?
So we are publishing in Farsi Dari, which is one of our official language in Afghanistan, and also we publish in English. And we have two different audience in mind. For the Farsi Dari website, our audience is, of course, Afghans inside the country, and also, Afghans who left the country more recently and are able to read and communicate in Farsi Dari. So that is like the audience that we hope to target. And also we hope that our work be as a kind of starting a conversation about the issues that matter to us, to Afghans, and also having conversation about like how we should go about creating the future of Afghanistan and what is our responsibility as citizens, and possibly how we can resist the Taliban. But for the English website, we are trying to reach decision makers, the people who are, thinking and daily making decisions about the relationship of their country with Afghanistan. We are hoping to reach NGOs who are working in Afghanistan or on Afghanistan. We are hoping to reach journalists and media outlets who are covering, even if that means once a year, they're covering Afghanistan. So we want to reach them and inform their way of looking at Afghanistan and what they're seeing, and inform their decision making, the way that they should be thinking about Afghanistan, and also, being able to represent the diversity of Afghanistan people, and also, the situation of women and LGBTQ community and what they are going through. So we are hoping to be able to reach those, and also like general public who are interested about Afghanistan, who want to know more, women's rights organization who are concerned, who are trying to do something. So we are hoping to reach those people, and hopefully that kind of reaching out, because we believe that action starts with awareness, and if you know something, you can do something about it. But if you don't know anything, it's very unlikely that you would take any steps. So our hope is to be able to inspire action.
Your hope is to be able to inspire action. That's a nice lead in to what I wanted to ask you next, which is about impact. How do you ensure that your work is making a difference? The work in itself is already so difficult and so fraught, as we've established. How do you ensure that that call to action is being taken seriously by your audiences?
I think the first thing is about us bringing the stories that we feel matter in Afghanistan, the stories like the deaths of the women who are being killed and there is no accountability for it. We cover these stories, we bring these stories to our audience, and we let them, do something with this knowledge, with this information. And for us, so far, we were able to, our stories being able to made it to the places that we want this to go to. For example, it's been some of the NGOs are reading our stories. Special rapporteur on Afghanistan is reading our work, our stories. And sometimes they get in touch with us and talk about the details of these stories. And human rights organizations that are documenting the situation in Afghanistan sometimes get our story and contact us and tell us that they're interested to have a conversation about their story, or like possibly be able to, through us, contact the sources that we speak to. So these are, some of the kind of impact that we are hoping to be able to make, to be part of the conversation in Afghanistan, and basically being the voice of the most marginalized in Afghanistan, taking their voices and putting it in places, in platforms where this decision makers or the people involved in Afghanistan be able to see that and also engage with that.
So significant players are reading the Zan Times and using it to inform themselves. Now, I have a question about how you were able to keep your ear to the ground from afar. So you have your network of journalists on the ground, because it must also be hard. Like, what is it like to have to verify from a distance? How do you check that what is happening is indeed what is happening?
So I think the ways that we go is, as I said, thankfully we have a very big contact and network in Afghanistan, in different provinces, different places. And we are trying to very much fact check the information that we publish. And we try to confirm this with different sources on Afghanistan. And to just give you an information about like reporting from exile. So some of these stories is being done by our colleague on the ground. So they do go to the people, to the sources, do the interview, collect the information, and send their story to us. And then we have questions and we want them, to provide more information or possibly any evidence or any photo or something that would corroborate their story. And sometimes there are stories that is like very risky to cover from inside Afghanistan. Like the story of this female YouTuber that I told you. It's very sensitive. So what we do on those cases, that the journalists on the ground, they provide us with the information, with the contact of the sources, because they cannot themselves reach out to the sources. If they do, it could be that both of their life might be at risk. So we make these decisions that there are some stories that we cover from outside Afghanistan. So we got the information and we call them. And sometimes we find it to be easier for the people to talk to us outside Afghanistan than a journalist who is living under the Taliban rule, because they're scared that if this journalist is arrested, my identity could be also known. But sometimes that risk is mitigated when a journalist from outside the country call, and a journalist that they can trust and talk to. So we find that to be helpful. And for me personally, that's not a new thing that I started doing since the Taliban takeover. When I was in Afghanistan working even for the New York Times, some of the stories that I worked on, I was never on the field in provinces that were very hostile to journalists, were hostile, and also there was war and conflict. It was not possible for us to reach those areas. We would always do remote reporting, and that has been something that give us the ability to think that we can do this work. Sometimes this is a benefit for us to do it from afar. As I said, like, people sometimes trust us more because they know that we are not living under the Taliban's thumbs and they cannot arrest us.
That's very interesting. Sometimes it's the only way that this story will get out, but sometimes it is the best way to tell the story. You mentioned earlier, it's come up a few times now, the female YouTuber who had quite an audience, and how you reported on that story. Are there other examples of stories that you're particularly proud of?
I think we have done many, many stories, but to give you just a few more examples, we did launch an archive late April this year, which looks at, we're trying to document the violence against public women. By public women, we mean that any woman who had a public role in society, whether they were a student, they were teachers, they were policewomen, lawyers, politician, activist, they had a role in public. So what we started seeing when the Taliban took over in August 2021 was the news of women being turned up dead, and most of those women were like there was no information, just saying a woman's body was found here, a woman's body was found there, with little context and information who this woman was, what she had done, and who might have killed her. And of course, there's a total impunity for femicide, for women being killed. There is no follow-up, in most cases we never hear that anybody being arrested in relation to their death. So we started looking at this information and trying to put together and also to put together an archive, and also look at why these women were killed. And in most of those cases we found that those women had a public role. So we started documenting the cases, and we are still an ongoing work for us. We looked at 3 ways, like the women who have been killed, the women who disappeared, the women who have been arrested because of their public role going to a protest. And to give you one example of those stories is the story of a teacher in northern Afghanistan. When the Taliban banned the school, she was a high school teacher, she lost her job. She had a family to feed. So her husband is disabled, he cannot work, and this is only up to her to feed her family. So she started working as a private teacher, going to some of her former students' home and teaching them there. The Taliban get to know about this, and they summoned her family, her husband and brother in different instances, and told them that we have information that this woman is prostitute, and we want you to stop her from, doing sex work. And of course, the family told her, no, we have wrong information. She's teaching, in people's houses because she had a family to feed. And that's give her something else. If you don't want her to go to other people's home, give her something that she can do at her home or elsewhere, whatever you say. She just needs to feed her family in any way possible. Give her a job, and she would stay at home or do whatever. And so this happened, I think, once or twice that they were summoned, and then she ended up being killed near her home when she was returning from one of her jobs. It was announced in the mosque that she was a prostitute. So just she was dead. There's no accountability for her. And as far as we get to know the story, her children are young, are begging on the streets. and her husband has a vision impairment, so he could not work for that. And the sources told us that he tried to commit suicide several times, but because he had two young daughters, he said that it's better, like to have a disabled father than no father under the Taliban, which is make women very vulnerable. So that is, and literally no accountability for her death, who killed her, and also, like as I said, the family was stigmatized that she was a prostitute. So that is, what's happening to some of the women who are working, who have to feed their family, and we see this as a systematic violence, and also this is happening with total impunity. We are trying to document those kind of works. And to add to that, there was another story we published, I think it was a few months ago. We published a story about how the Taliban have raped some of the women they have arrested in their prison. And those women whom the Taliban arrested in relation to violation of their dress code, saying that, oh, like your scarf is not big enough, or your, I don't know, your pants is so tight and things like that. They were arrested. And some of these women were sexually harassed and raped in the Taliban prison. So one of those girls was a teenager, 16-year-old. She spent 2 weeks in the Taliban prison. And when she was released, the night she was released, she committed suicide in her own home. And she only cried and told her mother that she was dishonored. And she's dead. And again, no accountability for her death. And there was another woman who was arrested for the same, accusation of like violation of their dress code. And 22 days, I think, after she was killed, her dead body was found. And again, no accountability. When her parents went to ask the Taliban for justice, for why their daughter's been killed and been arrested for violation of their dress code, and then her body's being found dead, on the city. Why this is happening, this injustice? And the parents disappeared. So there's no information about what happened to them. And they were arrested by the Taliban with their children, but the children were released after 5 days, but the parents no. And as far as we talked with the sources, there was no information on what happened to the parents.
Now, hearing the stories that you tell, uh, the stories that you're sharing now as we're talking, and of course the stories that you have been reporting on, these are very, very difficult, harrowing stories. And I think I'm starting to understand why you said in the beginning that your business model was resistance. But I do want to hear a little bit more about that. What do you mean by resistance?
I think the reason that we, as earlier I mentioned, when we started our work, it was not, for us, it was not building an organization or creating another newsroom and trying to do business, or the normal ways that you're supposed to be thinking about creating an organization. For us, it was about, we have a responsibility to our people, and we as a journalist feel kind of responsible that we should be the voice of our community and report on critical issues at a difficult time like this. And especially in the face of the Taliban's war on women, as women journalists, we have a role to play. And that role came up to be, just reporting critical issues, focusing on human rights in Afghanistan, and looking on the issues that the Taliban don't want to be covered, don't want any reporting on it. And the way we see this work is it's a way of resisting the Taliban. That when they are trying to remove us from society, they try to make us invisible in society. We are here resisting and reporting on the stories that the Taliban wants nobody to know about.
Where would you situate yourself within the Afghan media landscape? I can imagine that you're also not alone as journalists. That you must be a part of the resistance. Surely there are other parts of society that are trying to stand against this oppression as well. Or do you feel that you have a specific niche that you occupy?
I think there are other Afghan media also in exile that are doing this work, but they might not be specifically focusing on human rights in Afghanistan. They might be covering, like many more topics. But I think what makes Zan Times more different than other newsroom is that we are trying to have a more investigative look at the issues and spend time with their story. And we are not doing any daily news in a way that we, like keep our audience updated on what's happening. So most of the media in Afghanistan focus on news, and we focus on trying to do more feature and investigative work. And possibly, I think the reason that we focus on this work is also coming from this understanding, because initially we also started doing news and like covering almost everything. But later on, we understood that we have to focus where it's need, and also where we can make the most impact. And we find that to be investigative journalism, and also the kind of journalism that spend time with the story, with the sources, and try to look places that no other people do not look or cannot look. So that's the spaces that we want to work in.
You've outlined very well and in sort of great, vivid detail, like how difficult it is to tell these stories, how difficult it is also to hear those stories. I want to go back to something you said in the beginning about how you felt that many times things seemed lost. What were those moments and how did you overcome them?
Oh, thanks for that question. Because as I said, when I started this work as a journalist. And my idea of building Zan Times was that I'm going to go and sit and do the reporting. I'm going to interview people. I'm going to be writing stories. Then I started Zan Times, and it's like, I learned that that's not what I will be doing. I will be thinking about the hiring people, keeping people safe, being able to pay them at the end of the month, and also thinking for how long Zan Times can do this work. For how long can we, continue doing this kind of reporting. So the idea, when I started Zan Times with a group of other women, Afghan women journalists, I started my own saving as a seed funding for this. And I had no idea of like where the next money is gonna come. And I think 5 months, 6 months into the work, it was like we were almost giving up. I remember one of my colleagues said that like it just is like we cannot go on just all volunteering and just like literally there is no hope, and it's not wise to continue going. We tried, but it didn't work. Let's stop here and say bye and go. But I think for me personally, giving up was not an option always, because if something matters to me, I feel that I have to be the last person standing there and fighting for that. And I understandably, some of my colleagues left at that time, and I could understand them, and I, totally give them the right to do so. But a small group of us stayed and said, no matter what, we're gonna continue doing it because this is our mission. This is what we should be doing. Um, and again, not having any experience is like you literally facing. I didn't know like what an HR does or what finance is about, and then sitting there and thinking that I have to write a proposal, which I don't know how to write. All of that seems like an impossible task, daily. You have to manage everything while you don't know. So, like, your option is that should I go Google it? Should I watch a YouTube video about it? Like, how should I deal with this? And most of the time, you don't have that luxury of the time to be able to sit and read or watch something about it. Like, you have to do it. Like this is you make decision, and soon you will find out whether that decision was a correct one or was a wrong one. Then I think the way I approach this is like, experimenting and also learning what works and what is not working. And I think I have learned a lot in the past 2 years. I have learned from my colleague. I have learned from what didn't work, what worked. And one challenge remained for us is just thinking that how I can keep my colleagues safe and how I can pay them at the end of the month. And this not being able to fundraise is a challenge that we are facing. And since we were not very much thinking from the day one of like what's our business model, how are we going to fund ourselves? So this is something that we have to constantly think and also try to survive at this space. And one of the reasons is that I had no connection coming to this work with funders, with people who are supporting the media. So I am establishing those connections. I have been lucky to be able to get to know many organizations in the past 2 years. We have worked with many organizations, but our survival is still a challenge. Still, we have to be thinking like, how are we going to do this work? But possibly in the future, we are hoping to be able to create a platform where it's supported by its readers, especially the readers who can afford to pay, and keep Zan Times going.
You have said that, of course, it takes more than the will to produce, the will to operate a newsroom, and the purity of motivation and intent to keep it running. You've talked about how difficult it is to fundraise. I also noticed, however, that one of your sources of funding is partnerships with other organizations. How does that work exactly? How is that different from fundraising?
So partnership, I think, is some of the time we work with some organization on a story, for example, and they help us, with the cost of producing a story. Like they will pay us, so we can pay the journalist. So this is we see kind of as a partnership, and then we publish the story or the product as a shared work. So the organization will publish on their website, will publish on our website, and we say that this was produced in partnership with this particular organization. And that's the kind of work that we are hoping to be able to do more. And because we are seeing that it's becoming almost impossible for international media to cover Afghanistan and have journalists on the ground, we can cover that. We can provide that access, but we need their support to be able to do this work, and also the trust. Because I think, to be honest, sometimes or most often, the international media look down on the local journalists and say, like they might not be doing, the kind of standard work and the quality of work we want them. But I think they should be looking at our work and make their judgment, but based on what they see, and also give us a chance to be in their byline, and also to inform and bring stories that they might not be necessarily to get if they are working with an international correspondent who just go there, spend a week or so, and then they came back and they have a story to tell. We have been living that story for a long time, and probably we are able to tell the story with its nuances and also context of what that particular thing mean to the people of Afghanistan, and also possibly to, in broader sense. And by broader sense, I mean the situation or the crisis of women's rights in Afghanistan is most often being seen as the problem of Afghanistan, as the problem of the people of Afghanistan. But I think that has consequences for the world, because the Taliban have brought the bar so low for what could be denied to women, and there's literally no response, no action internationally that could prevent anybody from denying women's rights. And I hope that being seen as a global problem, and we look at that not as only the problem of Afghanistan, but as a crisis of women's rights in our time, and also for the world to think about how they should be approaching this issue.
As the founder of the Zan Times, what is it that you want to see from the international community?
I want them to treat the people of Afghanistan equally with, like if their own, like, how they treat human rights issues elsewhere or on their own country, not elsewhere. I want them to also see the situation in Afghanistan the same. And I want them to be accountable, because most of these countries were involved in Afghanistan, were part of the story and the crisis that Afghanistan is going through. They are, they have a responsibility in that term. And also, I want to see more stories of Afghanistan on the international media, and also possibly the stories that Afghan women journalists are telling it and reporting it. Because I think we can bring a fuller story than a journalist who doesn't know a lot about the situation and is there for a story. Our colleagues in Afghanistan is living those stories that they're telling. So just give us a chance to inform your audiences, to tell you, to bring your stories from Afghanistan.
I suppose I only just have a few more questions left, and towards the top of this conversation that we had, there was this question posed about whether it is possible for an outlet like the Zan Times to thrive under these very, very challenging conditions. What do you think the answer is? Because you do have a vision for your outlet. You do have a vision for the Zan Times.
I definitely do, and but again, like this is so much challenges that does not always allow us to be ambitious, to think beyond, the next 6 months, beyond the next year. But I really hope for Zan Times to grow to be an kind of impactful newsroom where it showcased the power of women journalists. It also showcased investigative journalism in Afghanistan and what journalism from those poor countries can actually bring to the table and inform audiences. So there's a lot at stake, especially with the fact that in Afghanistan, we as women journalists have been always kind of overlooked. And we want to challenge that assumption. And sometimes is kind of our way of challenging many, many assumptions about what women in Afghanistan can do and cannot do. And we want Zan Times to be, the platform where people would come for thoughtful, for impactful journalism.
I think that's actually like very insightful. The work that you are doing in itself is a statement against the oppression. Now, my time with you is coming to a close, but I would also just, it's becoming very clear to me that although you did say that there were many times that you thought things might have been lost and it might not be possible to continue, you are still continuing in the face of all of this. And I just find that very admirable. Before we let you go, however, we need to hear your 3 best practice tips. I can imagine how much you've learned in running Zan Times. What are the 3 that you would like to impart to our listeners?
So I'm going to start with, like there are so many people who might be, trying to think of establishing a newsroom or a product or something that they think is important, that they think is able to tell a story that not been told before. And I think, and sometimes we get caught up into the idea of like, oh, it takes so much to build an organization and like you need a lot of resources. And I would say to them, by coming out of the experience of Zan Times and literally no funding to begin with, I would just say, start where you are, start with whatever you have. Be ready not to give up, because there's going to come days that you will be crushed, that you regret starting this work. But I would promise you that if you pass that threshold, good days is going to be there, and days that you will feel proud of what you did and what you have achieved. And third one is that most of the time doing this work is not very much about the impact that we are making outside in the world, but it's about the impact that we are kind of being able to make with ourselves, and the feeling that I have stepped out of my comfort zone and did something that was very much unlikely or scary for me. So I think there's a growth in that. And that growth by itself matters so much and help us to do great things in the world. And I really hope that you take that risk and do something that you feel is important and matters so much to you.
So let's see if I got this. So your 3 best practice tips, the 3 best practice tips from Zahra Nader of the Zan Times. So you start where you are, and you start with what you have. You have to be ready not to give up, because there are good days. And thirdly, to recognize the growth that this work fosters in you, and the potential you have to achieve great things.
Yes.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much to our guest today, Zahra Nader of the Zan Times. And thank you, dear listeners, for accompanying us today. Do check out the show notes for more. Till next time on Survive and Thrive.
Thanks for listening to Survive and Thrive, the Media Viability Podcast. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and make sure to hit like so that other listeners can find us as well. For feedback, send an email to dw-academy.surviveandthrive@dw.com. You can find all the information in the show notes.